Hi friends, alrighty, so let's talk about people with disabilities and how we've been impacted by this pandemic and more specifically by the vaccine rollout, and also how disabled people are treated or how we function in society on a daily basis. Um, just before we start though, I know I gave this disclaimer on my story earlier, but I'm just giving it again here. I'm not an expert. I don't claim to be an expert, nor do I claim to be an authority on this topic. All I am is someone who's blind, who's been born blind, and I've been trying to, you know, navigate this world for the past 25 years. So this is just me sharing my lived experiences. And also, I want to really thank everyone who sent in their questions or concerns or thoughts. I also want to thank the people who sent some super awesome supportive messages. All of you are awesome and it really means a lot. So without further ado, let's hop into the first question in the next story. Alrighty, so this first question came through the question sticker and it asks, how is your blindness different than people who are completely blind? Um, that's a very good question, and I know a lot of people ask that question. And so I think it's a good starting point is to establish that there are, with all disabilities, there are different sort of levels. Think of it as sort of a scale or a spectrum, and there are different levels of variation. So there's people who are completely blind versus people who are partially blind versus people who can see a bit more, can see a bit less. So it's a spectrum. It's the same thing with being deaf, right? There are people who are deaf. There are people who are completely deaf. There are people who are hard of hearing. There are varying levels of being hard of hearing. So all of these are sort of a scale, if that makes sense. To answer your question, for me personally, I am completely blind in my right eye, and I'm partially blind in my left eye. So I can see with almost quarter of my left eye, but I also can't see in a very far distance, which is why a lot of you who know me know that like when I'm working on something or I'm reading or what have you, I get super close to things in order to be able to see them. And same thing with people, right? Like a lot of times I'm talking to people and I can't see their faces. I can see that there's someone there, but I can't see their face. I am considered legally blind. And yeah, so that is the thing. And one thing that's very important to mention here is just because someone is capable of seeing a little bit does not mean they're not blind. Same thing with all the other disabilities, right? Just because someone's not completely blind or completely deaf, that does not make them not deaf or not blind. We still have these disabilities. We still try to function with our disabilities and coping with them, and everyone's experience is different, right? And someone who's blind at birth like me varies wildly from someone who sort of became blind, kind of thing. And all these things matter. Two people can have the same disabilities, but people have different personalities. They get the disabilities because of different reasons. So it's not one size fits all, if that makes sense. But yeah, I hope that answered your question. And if it didn't, drop me a message right down there, and I'll be more than happy to either have a chat personally or we can even continue the conversation here. And moving on to the second question. So the second question, also through the question sticker, asks, what percentage of your vision do you have now? And that's kind of a hard question because I don't think I can put a number on it. I would say technically, or I think medically, it's between 10 and 15-ish%. But you can't really put a number on it, right? And that sort of brings me to another question, which a lot of people ask me all the time. It wasn't asked in the questions, but a lot of people ask like, hey, so how do you see like? And for me, I can't really explain that because I was born with my blindness. So don't if people ask me that question, they get shocked when I say, oh, I see normal. Because, well, to me, this is normal. I don't know what normal people see like, or regular people see like. I hate those two terms so much, but just to make it easier for everyone to understand. Yeah, I don't know what they see like. So to me, what I see is normal. Um, and actually, that percentage, along with the first question of how is me being blind different than the person completely being blind, it reminded me actually of a bit of a funny story, uh, which happened more than once actually, but a lot of the times, I'd be walking down somewhere and someone would wave at me, and obviously I wouldn't see them because if I don't hear your voice, or if I don't see that you're like close enough to me and I know that you're there, I can't see you. Or if you're on my blind side, I can't see you. Like my hand's right here right now and I can't see my hand. Um, so, um, a lot of people see me after they've waved at me somewhere in a hallway, and they're like, "Oh, I saw you over the weekend and I waved at you, but you didn't wave back." And it's funny, but it's also like, yeah, like why do you think that is, um so I think it's also very important to be aware of these things, and just you know um come up, say hi, speak to me, instead of just waving from a distance. And if I don't respond, I promise you it's not me being rude, it's just that I can't see you there. So yeah. Third question. Alrighty, so this third question was actually sent to me via DM, by someone who's working at a vaccine distribution center. And the question is, how can I advocate for more vaccines for people with disabilities at my work? Which, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much for asking that question, which is very important. I think in order to answer that question, we need to start at the core of the problem, right? This pandemic has affected people with disabilities immensely. Um, Deaf people who do lip reading can't do as much of that now because people are wearing masks. Um, Blind people like me who need to get super close to things or super close to people in order to see them, we can't do that anymore because you shouldn't get things close to your face, and you shouldn't touch things. Like, I'm someone who navigates life by touching things and feeling things. Like, that's sort of how I see the world. And I can't do as much of that anymore. People on wheelchairs often are pushing themselves through, moving the wheels, and then their hands are on the wheels and their wheels are touching the ground. So there are all these sort of, I don't want to say nuanced, but they are kind of nuanced differences between how a disabled person lives their life and how a person without a disability lives their life, right? And oftentimes people don't think about that. People don't consider these differences. So it's like, oh well, disabled people aren't in the priority groups. Which, fun fact for you, disabled people are not in a priority group in most countries. I would go even as far as saying in all countries. Um, so yeah, I think that's at the core of it, right? So advocating to roll out more vaccines for people with disabilities needs to start with raising awareness of why people need them, right? Like, we're not saying we need the vaccine because we want it, because it's fun, because we want it first. Like, no, we want the vaccine in order to be able to live our lives, right? We want the vaccines in order to be able to live our lives, in order to be have things be accessible to us, right? It's not because I just want to get it first. It's because I touch things everywhere. I get things close to my face everywhere. And that has been a challenge for me. And I know it's been a challenge for a lot of people. And that's why, so yeah, I think part of advocating for people to get the vaccines early, and this is just one small part, right? But I think this is where we need to start before we dig into all the other things. We need to take this little portion and spread awareness about that, and that's how we start to uh, advocate by not necessarily pushing. Oh, we need more vaccines for blind people, but or for people with disabilities, not even just blind people, but instead explain to people the why. I feel like there's a lot of times there's a lot of demand without the explanation of the why. So I think once you explain the why to people, they're more likely to actually, see it from your point of view. Um, so I think, thank you again for the question. I think that's super important, and I think it's super awesome that you are trying to advocate for us, people with disabilities, and trying to do that kind of thing. I really appreciate it, and I know that a lot of people would really appreciate it. So thank you. Just a quick clarification on my previous post, because I don't want to get misunderstood. When I said disabled people aren't in the priority groups for countries, I'm referring to the COVID vaccine. Um, I just didn't want that to get misinterpreted or taken the wrong way. So yeah, that's just what I meant, and I thought I'd clarify that. All right, so next question, also through the question sticker. What are the accommodations that governments need to provide but often don't? Um, I think another very good question, and whew, where should I begin? Um, Again, people who know me know that I've lived in multiple different countries. I was born in Lebanon, I grew up in Lebanon, I moved to Qatar, I lived in the US for a year, and I've been to a number of different countries. So I feel like that question kind of differs by country and by location, um, and also by disability as well, because it's different. Again, it's different for all of us. But I think a few of the things. So in an ideal world, I feel like I'm gonna talk about myself. But in an ideal world, right? Inclusivity would not mean that you need to do something to include me as a disabled person, right? That's not true inclusivity. True inclusivity means that the process from the get go would include people with disabilities, right? And I think that's the main thing, right? To be inclusive is not to create accommodations. To be inclusive is to be inclusive from the get go and not need someone to come up to you and be like, hey, I need this in order to be able to perform like everyone else, right? Granted, this is like ideal, we're talking idealistically. Um, but we don't live in an ideal world, and we will not live in an ideal world anytime soon. I don't think we'll live in an ideal world, definitely not in our lifetime. And this is not me being a pessimist. This is just, reality. We just will not get to that stage. Um, but I think like little things that governments could do, specifically with the COVID vaccine, it's obviously, elderly people are in the first category, people with chronic illnesses, which I got a few messages about that being like, hey, but aren't people with disabilities, isn't that considered a chronic illness? And no, it is not, because by definition, a chronic illness is a disease, right? A disability is not a disease, so we are not considered people with chronic illnesses. So we don't fall into these categories. So I think one of the most important things that governments can do, especially right now, is add disabled people to the list of priorities. Either with elderly people or with teachers. I'm a firm believer, and I'm an advocate that teachers should actually get their vaccines earlier, because teachers are essential workers, and especially with governments that are opening schools back up, which I don't think should be happening. But what do I know? That's another rant for another day. Um, but yeah, like just like teachers need to get vaccinated in order to be able to do their job, we need to get vaccinated as people with disabilities in order to live our lives. So I think um, one thing that governments could do is add us to the list of priorities. Um, Another thing that governments can do, which is often sort of unnoticed or goes sort of I guess unthought of, is making things more accessible. You know, whether that is printing signs, and this is not specific to COVID, but this is just in general, whether it is printing signs in very large text for people who are blind to be able to see them, whether it's captioning movies or mandating that movies get captioned. And a little footnote, I guess, here, yes, there is a difference between captioning and subtitling, because a lot of times I see movies that are subtitled in the same language that the audio is in, but that is not closed captioning, right? Because it's just the text, but with closed captioning it's more sort of specific, where you have a bit more descriptive text. So that's another thing. Also being able to have accessible streets, accessible roads. I know in the US, a lot of older buildings or older streets or ramps or things like that are not ADA accessible, because it would cost more money to make things ADA accessible. So instead of spending money on, I'm just gonna say, just as an example, instead of spending money on erecting a statue of someone by a city, whether that's in Qatar or in Lebanon or in the US or in Spain or in France or anywhere in the world, that money could be put in to making things more accessible, i.e. into evening out the playing field for people with disabilities. So yeah, I don't know if that answered that question. That was a very long-winded way of answering your question, but I hope it did. And again, if it didn't, message me down below and we can chat further. Alrighty, so here's another question, also from the question sticker, and someone's asking, how is navigating social media or world in general for a blind person? I love that question so much, and if you know me, you know that I work in social media right now, so it's a large part of what I do on the daily. Okay, so that being said, I think there are two parts to answer that question, for me at least, right? And there is some intersectionality between both, but I'm gonna address them as two different parts. So think of it as a Venn diagram, and that's because I do social media for work. So think of it as social media for work versus social media for pleasure. I think when it comes to doing social media for pleasure, for me, some of the things that I tend to do is, I'm a very visual person. So one thing that I do, for example, is I spend a lot more time looking at visuals than reading the captions or reading the text. One thing that actually is really frustrating is when people like put up a story with text and the text is like super tiny in the corner. And I get it, it's aesthetically pleasing. It's, the minimalistic design that they're going for. But a lot of times for me, it's like, oh, I'm gonna screenshot this and zoom it in. But then there's like, oh, is it gonna be weird if they see that I screenshot their story? What are they gonna think? Are they gonna think I'm weird and I'm stalking them? Because I can guarantee you, 9.5 times out of 10, if I screenshot someone's story and they see that I screenshot it, they're not gonna think, oh, he screenshotted it because he's blind and he needs to zoom in. 9.5 times out of 10 people aren't gonna think that. People are gonna think that, oh, why did he screenshot my story? That's weird. Because, it's not something that people actively think about. So yeah, I think I tend to focus more on visuals. I read the captions if the visual sort of brings me in, then I take the effort to read the caption. But yeah, so that's me personally. Me at work, obviously I can't do that So I use a lot of text-to-speech apps. Um, and the other reason for using a lot of text-to-speech apps is because, when I'm scrolling through social media for pleasure, I actually can take my own time and read things at my own pace. Um, but when I'm at work and I'm doing social media, and someone's over my head being like, "Hey, is this done? Hey, is this done? We need to post it now. Let's post now. Like, let's do it now, right now. Why isn't it out yet?" As someone who needs more time to do things, which people don't get that, right? People are like, "Oh yeah, well, the other person could have done it in 1 minute. Why is it taking you so long?" And I'm the kind of person who I make it a point to myself to not take longer than other people at work, because I don't know, it's just me. Um that it sort of a lot of times becomes an expectation that, oh, it shouldn't take you any longer, despite the fact that I often sometimes need a bit longer, and not a lot longer. We're not talking about like, oh, if it's something that takes someone else a minute, it's going to take me 15 minutes. No, we're talking about if it's going to take someone else 5 minutes, it's going to take me 6 or 7. um so I feel like because of that, a lot of what I tend to do is, text to speech, where I um, am able to actually hear what I'm looking at while I'm also looking at the visual to make sure that things match. Um, so that's something I do quite a lot at work, actually. I also use that when I'm texting, sometimes in my personal life, more than I do use this in my personal life more than work. Um, is voice to text or speech to text. Where, like, if I'm walking somewhere and I'm also texting someone, or if I'm typing a long ass message, I just use either voice notes if the app allows for voice notes or voice messages, or speech to text. That's it in terms of social media. In terms of navigating life, I'm going to talk about that a bit in the next story. In terms of navigating life, um, a lot of that for me is through, obviously I can still see a little bit, which helps a lot, but a lot of navigating life to me is through touch and through hearing. Um, Weird fact about me, I can actually identify people by their footsteps, or their scent. And that's not something that I've learned, but it's something that I was always able to do, right? If I'm expecting someone in my office and they're walking down the hallway, I hear their footsteps and I know it's that person. Or actually, a couple of days ago, I walked into like a couple of my colleagues' office and I was like, "Oh, X was here, wasn't he?" And they're like, "Yeah, how do you know?" And I was like, "Oh, I can just smell him," which I know it sounds very weird and very creepy, but it's just, it's you develop ways in order to navigate life. When you can't see as well. Same thing at like supermarkets or whatever. Like, I need to get super close to things. A lot of times I also use this is more with COVID, which has also been, it's not a solution because it's been tough, but a lot of times instead of like actually getting closer to the products, I use my phone's camera. And actually, a couple of times I had people come up to me and be like, "Don't take pictures of me," and they're sort of fighting me, thinking I'm gonna take pictures of them, and I'm like, "No, sweetie, I last thing I want is a picture of you on my phone." So yeah. No, I just like, and I need to explain to them that I'm actually taking a picture of the product, and they get angry, and then they don't believe you, and they want to look at my photo gallery, and I'm like, "Dude, just fuck off," and I'm sorry for my language, but that's just what I go through. I like, it just becomes me having to explain myself to this random stranger because he or she thinks that I'm taking a picture of them. Um, so yeah, that's just another thing that you have to deal with, and you learn to be okay with it. At times, it gets frustrating, it gets annoying, but it is what it is. All right. The next question, also through the question sticker. What are ways we can help people with visual impairments as their friends? I love this question so much. And I think whether it's friends, whether it's work, um, no matter what it is, the biggest thing is to listen to people and hear them. And yes, I did say listen and hear because those are two very different things. Um, a lot of times we listen to people, but we don't hear what they're saying. We hear what we want to hear. We don't hear what people are saying. With people with disabilities, whether that's visual impairment or anything else, um, it's very important to actually listen, right? Like if it's important to also um, ask your friend who has a disability, what do you need? What can I do to make things easier for you? And have them respond instead of you determining what they need or you forcing what you think they need on them, right? And if I tell you I need this thing, and I don't need the other thing, don't ask me if I'm sure. Because it's well intentioned and I get it, and it doesn't bother me personally, but I know it bothers a lot of other people. Uh, it just like we've been asked these questions so many times and we know exactly what we need, so just ask us, um and respect our answers. If we say we need this, that, and the other thing, then respect that. And if we say we don't need this, then also respect that, and don't be like, well, I think this will actually really help you. Because despite the fact that it's well intentioned, what you think doesn't really matter, because it'll make us feel pressured to actually say yes because you think it's good, but it actually doesn't help us, or sometimes it makes our life more difficult. So I think take some of that pressure off by just listening to them and hearing them out, and actually listening to what they want and what they need. And I think that applies at work too, right? If you have an employee who's blind, um, ask them what they need and actually listen and hear what they need, because a lot of times also people with disabilities, we are kind of, we've learned how to navigate life well enough that we are, I don't want to say we're scared because it's not scared isn't the right word, but it's kind of difficult for us to ask for things out of the blue. um, So I think it's very important for employers, specifically, and line managers or managers generally, to ask people with disabilities, what do you need? What can I do to actually help you out? And again, don't just have that expectation, or don't sort of force what you think a person needs on them, but just ask them, and I guess on occasions, just let them know that you're still here for them. Be like, hey, I know we discussed this before, but I just wanted to let you know, if anything changed or you need anything, let me know. Sometimes that's all it takes, like, and obviously don't do that every time you see someone with a disability and like you say, hey, just want to remind you that I'm here for, like, no, don't do that. But if you feel like you want to say something, instead of just not saying anything and moving away, just be like, hey, just want to let you know I'm here for you. I know we had this conversation before, if you had that conversation before, and just let me know if you need anything. I just wanted to let you know that. And even just saying that goes a long way, and it really means a lot. And um it's just very important because it takes a bit of the pressure off of us. Or if they were thinking that they want to ask for something but they didn't know how to start that conversation, that would be you prompting that conversation to start, or being like, hey, I actually care about what you have to say. So yeah, I think that goes for work, that goes for friendship, that goes for everything. Just don't force your perception on other people. And another thing that, actually, I'm going to go off on a bit of a rant here, or a bit of a tangent. Don't When you hear that someone's disabled or someone's blind or someone's deaf, don't have expectations. don't judge. And when I say don't have expectations, I don't want this to be taken incorrectly. Don't force your expectations on them, right? Because a lot of people go like, "Oh, you're blind. That means you can't do this, that, and the other thing, and you can't do this, that, and the other thing," which is so wrong on so many different levels. Because, again, as I said earlier, right? Like levels of disabilities vary and they change and they're different, and you should respect that, and you shouldn't force your perceived notions on these people. Wait till you meet that person and ask them. Be like, hey, how do you feel about doing this? And if they tell you they can do it, then they can do it. And if they tell you that they can't do it, then they can't do it. So don't force your perceived notions or perceived expectations on a person with disability. Just ask. I think communication is always key in things like that. Where just ask, and if we're uncomfortable, we'll tell you we're uncomfortable. So yeah, I think it's just respect. But yeah, that is. I think that's a very good question, and I think there's so many different layers to it, and I'd love to talk more about this. Actually, I'm gonna do a little poll somewhere on the screen, probably here, but if you'd like to hear more about this, then maybe I can do we can either do an Instagram live or something about the topic. But yeah, thank you for the question. Alrighty, last question, also through the question sticker. This is kind of a bit different, but also a fun one, I think. And the question is, whoops, I lost my questions here. There we are. What is it like dating as a blind person? That's a fun question. I think you're better off asking my partner. I think dating as a blind person can be kind of difficult. And I was actually, when I got that question, I talked to my partner about it a little bit, and we were having that conversation. And I don't treat it differently, because to me, just because I'm blind doesn't mean that it means that I'm different, but it's not something that sort of uh, again, going back to that perceived notions, right? I don't want people to force their perceived notions on me. Um, so I sometimes it does feel like my partner and I were talking about this the other day, and it feels like you're coming out as blind to your date or to someone, and sometimes you just move along the first couple of dates, and it doesn't even get brought up because the other person is super awesome, and they don't really care that you're blind or not. They just want to know you for who you are. And that's actually been the case with me and my partner. We actually didn't have that conversation until I think it was at least 3 dates in or so. And that doesn't mean that we didn't acknowledge the fact that I'm blind. We obviously did. But it never felt like I needed to come out. It didn't feel like, oh my God, are they gonna leave me because I'm blind? Which is super awesome, and I think that's also very important when you're dating someone with a disability. Is to just respect the fact that they're a person. Like, forget the disability. They're just a person. And I think that's something that, like, I'm very thankful for in my relationship, is that we have that understanding. And another I can't English. Another thing is just being able to have that conversation, being comfortable and being open with your partner, and being like, hey, I am disabled, I'm blind, and here's what that means, and here's how that potentially might impact our relationship. As a very important conversation that I think should be had, like, quite early on. maybe not on the first date or the second or third date, but like, eventually it's a conversation. And it doesn't, when I say conversation, it doesn't have to be, like a formal conversation. It could be like literally like you're on the phone and it comes up and it's like, hey, this is how this might impact our life in the future, or so on. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, the person who asked this question. If it didn't, drop me a line either on WhatsApp or Instagram. I know you do have my WhatsApp, and we can talk more about it. And yeah, again, it's the other kind of thing. If you want to hear more about that kind of topic, um, we can have another conversation about this. Or if you're interested to hear about dating in general with people with disabilities, maybe we can do a shared Instagram live with not just me but a couple other people with disabilities, and we can have that conversation. Again, not an influencer, not trying to be an influencer, just trying to get more knowledge out there around this the topic. So yeah, again, thank you all so very much for sending the questions. If you're still here, wow, I can't believe you stayed through so many stories. But I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate you listening to this. And yeah, just thank you so much for listening, for sharing your stories, for sharing your thoughts, and I really appreciate it. And let's keep this conversation going. Have this conversation with your friends. Have this conversations with your family. Have this conversation with me. If you're someone I work with, text me. If you're someone I work with, text me. If you're someone who just saw this and feels like you want more information, text me. If there's anything I can help explain, text me. I'm very passionate about this as someone who's grown up with it and lived with it for 25 years. So if there's anything I can explain or anything I didn't explain enough, reach out to me. Don't worry about being offensive. Don't worry about asking the wrong questions. If I am offended or if I don't want to answer your question, I'll just tell you and we'll move on and we'll learn from each other, and that'd be it. So yeah, thanks everyone. See ya.